My brain sees some things and tells me differently.
I think it's just because yellow starts with Y, and then so I see Y as yellow.
My synesthesia is projected out, and it's usually, yeah, you can see through it. Synesthesia is a mixing of the senses. For example, you might hear colors, or you might see letters printed in black as having a specific color. So if I have intense fear, then it's sort of like something is projected out onto reality. So if it's not super intense, I can still see what's behind it. So it's almost as if you had something projected, like a projector, but it has rotation in it. It has a very specific color, sort of green, bluish color. And it also has sort of like hills and some sharpness to it. So it has some texture to it. And that has always been the same. And it's just that it's the fear that I have to feel now will have to be intense, very, very intense for that to happen, whereas it happened a lot more often when I was younger. So it can be like very mild, where it's sort of barely visible in front of my eyes, or it can be very sort of strong, so where it blocks out the visual field. But that is not as often now. My daughter has a grapheme color synesthesia, where she sees letters and numbers as having specific colors. So her number 3 is green. And my dad also has a form of the same kind of synesthesia as my daughter. So you were like, oh, you were aware that most people didn't see it that way, but it was just that they didn't see it the right color. So you thought like, yeah, the number is really green, but most people just don't see it that way. So
3 starts with a T, and T is green, so 3 is green.
Oh, so you think that's interesting. So you think your numbers got colors from the letters? Oh. So I see pink, and I don't see any letter corresponding to that. And you see what?
P.
The letter P corresponds to that for her. Now this may not be the shade that she has, but this is like
W.
sort of, oh, W. This is this one.
V.
V. Oh, okay. What about that one?
Like A or O.
Oh, wow. And that one?
Y.
Y. And what about that one?
That one doesn't have a letter.
What about 7? Is that not this color of 7?
Not
No.
really.
So it's not just any white that will do. It's a specific shade of whites. There are people, if they don't talk about it and don't think about it, they just think, yeah, it's normal. It's like you look at a blue cup and it's blue, and maybe you have to refer to it, and they might say that it's blue, and if everyone else were to see that as red, then you would find out, of course, that you had something abnormal about your perception. But if you don't mention the color of the cup and you just see it as a blue cup, and other people see it as a red cup, you wouldn't find out. And similarly, if people see the letters as having specific colors, so the letter A may be red and the letter B may be blue, and so on, and they think, well, okay, so that's just how it is, and so some people just don't talk about it because it's just sort of, for them, background knowledge until they get into a conversation and they realize, wait a minute, you don't see it that way, or they very occasionally, two synesthetes might meet each other and might start disagreeing about the colors of the letters. I started the lab because I wanted to sort of look at synesthesia more systematically, and that was when I started a lab that looked primarily at synesthesia in people who have it from birth. If people find out that they have synesthesia and they realize that they're different from everyone else, it would be a good idea to get in contact with a synesthesia lab, perhaps one that's close, or they can also contact any lab, for example, my lab, and they can then get a test, at least for the most common types of synesthesia. That's an online test that can be sent to them. So they can test it, and they can also then get some information about how common it is. It's not very common, but it's also not super, super rare. So it's between 4 to 7% of the population, the general population. So it's not completely abnormal, or even though it's rare. Your score as a synesthete will look something like this, where there's almost no difference between the colors you pick for the 3 presentations. They're randomly presented, so this might be the first one presented, this might be the 30th presentation, and this might be the last presentation, but there's almost no difference here. Here's a little more of a difference, and then they average all that out, and if it's a score under 1, then it's a synesthete. But if you were not a synesthete, it looks more like this. So here's a score of 4.17 cases, since you're given all the numbers and all the letters 3 times in random order. Most people wouldn't be able to remember what color they chose, so they would just pick different colors. So they would score, so in this case, score over 4, and it has to be under 1 to be a synesthete. So this, in this case, is a definite case of a non-synesthete. We're trying to see if there's specific areas, color areas that light up in the brain, and also shape areas. And then for some of the tests, we can sort of see the connections between the two, and that they're different when you're seeing the color of a letter that's the wrong color and the letter that's the right color, for example. There's a difference between acquired synesthesia and developmental synesthesia. So developmental synesthesia is synesthesia that people are either born with or that they develop very early in childhood. And then there's acquired synesthesia, which is acquired after a brain injury or after brain disease, and occasionally it can develop after a kind of condition that releases a lot of adrenaline in the body. We've seen one case of that. Yeah, this is Derek Amato's brain. So yeah, so these little white spots here are sort of the cause of brain injury or concussion. So there's a little piece of tissue that dies and becomes scar tissue. A little bit of white stuff, some white dots up here. They're basically dead brain tissue that he has gotten through his brain injury. And so what you're looking at when you have it in a bigger format are those little white dots. So he has 7 small places in his brain where he has dead brain tissue, basically scar tissue. So this could cause a synesthesia or savant syndrome because of the brain injury.
Synesthesia, the definition to me personally, I guess, means that my brain sees some things and tells me differently. So, for instance, that black and white square that I see 24 hours a day, they're going around. Those to me are musical notation. So I visually see squares, but my brain tells me that they're musical composition, that they're notes, if that makes any sense. So 10 years ago, I dove into the swimming pool to catch a football. I hit the shallow end. I hit my head by the upper left side, and then I damaged the right lower lobe. That 5th day I woke up and I called Rick, a friend of mine that I had grown up with. He was actually with me during the time. He's the one that threw the football, so he was with me when I had the accident. I had grown up with him since we were kids, and so he came over and picked me up at my mother's house. We went back to his apartment. We were sitting there chatting, and there was this little tiny keyboard over in the corner. And I could just kind of see it out of the corner of my eye, and I felt like it was kind of calling me, like almost come tinker or hit a couple notes. I didn't know what would happen. And I don't know, maybe after a half hour of sitting there talking, I just walked over to it finally and sat down, and my hands just pretty much started playing fluid pieces and structured pieces of music. Then I had no idea where it came from, why. I had never played a piano as a child. I had no formal training, musical training. Although I've always been around music, so, you know, maybe it's been latent, maybe it's been in there this whole time, and maybe it just took hitting my head right to pull out that gift. I don't know. I think it's always challenging when something profound happens to that extent in your life, how you're going to explain it to the people that love you, the people that trust you, your peers, your associates, your networking circle of people. It's like, what in the hell am I gonna, I mean, I've already just told my mother, she knows I had a brain injury and already thinks I'm nuts. Now I'm gonna tell her, Mom, I'm a piano player. So you have this hesitating, it definitely takes some thought working through how you're going to share it with people, because I wasn't quite sure if it was going to still be with me that next morning. I was like, I went to bed thinking, I hope to God it's still here when I wake up, because I want to tell some people. And so I woke up and I took my mom to the music store. I said, you have to see this. And she had no idea what I was talking about, right? It's almost like I was watching this magical moment happen, and I didn't quite understand to what level it all was. I had no idea. I just thought, okay, it's a little strange. My hands are doing these things on the piano. There was a moment when Rick was standing right next to me as I was playing, and he started crying. I was crying. The room seemed like it was 150 degrees. I felt that God was present. And that's really hard to say in public, because when you start claiming God's touched you, people start thinking you really did hit your head hard. And I'm man enough to say that if I've ever had a moment with God, and I know I have, I've had many, this one was different. This one was real. It was profound. Can you imagine? I mean, you sit down and you start playing piano, and you're used to throwing a baseball, you know, or you've never played a piano. It'd be no different than if you were to just stand up and suddenly fly. Dr. Brogard is my closest link to getting medical answers. And she works outside of the box on a lot of these different situations that allow me to say, wow, that makes sense to me. So I just kind of hope that I get to learn more as we go together, so I can understand my condition precisely, so I can live with it happily every day. And I do anyway, but I think there's levels of learning this. And as I grow comfortable in my skin with this gift, I think it only makes sense for me to continue studying. And not only for my own self, but I hope it gives medical researchers and doctors and science some answers, because maybe those answers can fix something else medically. Maybe by studying my strange brain, or we should say beautiful brain, right? Maybe by studying, we find something that will allow us to treat cancer. I don't know. Well, I think the ideas are endless. I believe God gives all of us gifts. I just couldn't find mine, so he decided to whack me on the head a little harder than most.
And this is the song you first played.
This was the first piece that I first played, actually, and it's just always stayed there. It's like, it's always there. So.
Our motto is an acquired synesthete and Savats, who hurt his head in the pool. And he developed this gift for piano playing We don't know whether this gift will last, so we don't know whether the synesthesia will fade away over time or whether his savant abilities will persist over time. But we do know that in people with developmental synesthesia, so people who have synesthesia from birth, that they sometimes lose the gift. And we have a couple of subjects who lost their synesthesia at around the age of 20. We also have another case of acquired savant syndrome and acquired synesthesia. That is our youngest subject, Jordan. Jordan had several accidents. One was a skateboarding accident where she fell and hurt her head. And there was a certain shift in her perceptual abilities.
And I have these like terrible combat boots with like no tread. Long story short, I'm like a mile into this skate and I just like went down so hard and I had broken this collarbone from skating and putting my arm down, so I did not want to do that, so I rolled. But doing that, I slammed the back of my head into the concrete so hard. Skateboard goes off and I just sat up and it was like stars and black and stars, and that was the one that was really, I felt something shift. Like, it's hard to even explain, but it was like a shift in consciousness. I woke up and it's so funny, I saw this little tree branch going back and forth in the morning, and I was so happy to open my eyes, and the light was doing these crazy patterns, and I just kept looking at this thing. Everything felt not real, and that's kind of continued. It's a really like trippy feeling. I grew up drawing, but I did notice shifts in drawing. So for instance, when I used to draw, I'd basically draw the whole scene out and then get into detail. And with this, I kind of had a different way of approaching it. Like, I would get very detailed first. It's almost like I don't finish the drawings, but I'll like start on an eye, or if I'm doing a face, or like start on one aspect and then kind of just draw from there. So the pattern of that was different and the style was different. I wrote my first poem like literally that morning. And since then it hasn't stopped. Like, I stopped counting, but I think I've written well over 2,000 poems in the last year. They just don't stop, and that was the first, like, waking up and writing poetry, and it just constantly thinking of words and constantly wanting to do stuff like more in an archaic style. So instead of writing splendor, it'll be like SPLENDOUR, like this old school version, and that's what feels right. If all natural disasters were only that, the most natural earthly response to unnatural devastation and havoc, wrought with pain, arrogance, and abuse, inflicted upon arid flesh, drilled into shallow veins, hampering breath, prodigious reaming meets primordial screaming, pleading for us beings to notice her form as ours, to breathe with her, bleed as her, to stop.